Tonight's lesson has to do with integrity. And integrity is one of those words of virtue we throw around to say something generally good about somebody, and we really don't understand what it means. At least a lot of us don't. It's just one of those good words. Makes us feel good to use it, makes us feel good to say it about somebody else. But I think we need to take time to define these words before we talk about them in sermons. And so I've been searching for a good definition for the word integrity. And I looked at a lot of sources. Of course, I looked at the dictionary, the English word integrity, and Hebrew and Greek equivalents, although there's really not an exact Hebrew or Greek equivalent to the word integrity as we use it in our English today. And what I found was the best word for integrity is the word integrity itself. The root of the word really gives us more information than any definition we can find in a dictionary anywhere. Because the best idea about integrity is a person with integrity is an integrated person. We're all comprised of parts. See, we're all compartmentalized in a variety of ways. I'll give you some examples. Psychologists think of people as having brains with two hemispheres. And generally speaking, the left part of the brain does the linear thinking, the logic. It's where the language is. It's where the reason takes place. And the right brain, the right hemisphere of the brain, is where your creativity and imagination take place, your conceptualization, the ideas that you have, the potential, the hope in the future. That's where all of that takes place, generally speaking. And some people live too much over on the right side, and some people live too much over on the left side. But successful people integrate those two sides of the brains, the two parts of their thinking, and bring them into harmony. And that's why they're successful. And somebody might say, well, successful artists spend most of their time over on the right side of their brain. And they may have developed the right side of their brain more than the average person, but if they don't pull the left side over a little bit, where the logic and the reason is, they can't be successful in their art. And somebody might say, well, mathematicians and scientists, they spend most of their time over on the left side of their brain. But if they don't learn how to incorporate imagination, for example, into their work, they're not going to be very successful at all. Successful people integrate the two parts of their brain, and that has something to do with integrity. Psychologists also have been thinking about the brain in terms of the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain. I heard this concept a while back, and the upstairs part of the brain is your conscious level of thinking. The downstairs part is your brain stem, which controls your non-voluntary movements and the processes of your body, and also things like your fight or flight response. Now, a person who just lets that instinctive part of them take over is not going to be very successful. But also, if you always live up in the upstairs part of your brain and you never pay attention to those signals coming from the downstairs part of your brain, you're going to have trouble as well. You integrate those, and it makes life better. Now, of course, in the Bible, spiritually speaking, we're divided into two parts, at least two parts. The Bible talks about the body and the soul. We have bodies which are vessels for the essence of who we are, which is our spirit or our soul. And so at death, these are separated. Ecclesiastes 12, verse 7 says that the body returns to the dust as it was, and the spirit unto God who gave it. And James says that death is the separation of the body and the spirit, in James chapter 2, verse 26. So how do we lead lives of integrity? Spiritually speaking, we make sure that the body is in harmony with the soul. We integrate those two parts of us. We recognize that they exist, that we can emphasize one over the other, and we try to bring them into harmony with one another. And there are other ways to talk about our compartments, our parts. For example, John spent a lot of time talking about what we say and what we do. And there are people who say things but don't do them. We call them hypocrites. But another way of putting it is people who don't live with integrity. So in 1 John chapter 3, verse 18, John says, if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. You understand what he's saying? Don't just talk a good game. Do what you say you will do. Follow through. Don't be a hypocrite. John continues that thought in the next chapter, in 1 John chapter 4, verse 20, where he says, if anyone says, I love God and hates his brother, he is a liar. For, he says, he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. So hypocrisy is nothing more than living without integrity. Integrity is about bringing all of those parts of your life together into harmony. And I found a great verse that expresses this idea in Psalm 51, where in verse 6, David says in prayer to God, behold, you delight in truth in the inward being. Integrity is truth in the inward being. And when we are the same throughout, that's what integrity is. Another way I've heard it described is, you are the same person when nobody is looking that you are whenever all the eyes are on you. The same person in public as you are in private. That's somebody who lives with integrity. Now, integrity can be very helpful in life. And that's what I want to talk about tonight in connection with the book of Job. How integrity can help us face our challenges in life. Integrity is strengthening, it's empowering, it helps us face whatever trials and tests that confront us. And we see that lived out in the life of Job. And my original intention in developing this lesson was to go through the book of Job and look at examples of his integrity and how it helped him in all of his trials to emerge from them successfully. And as I was going through, looking at all of those references in the book of Job, Job is very comprehensive. It's a long book of the Bible. I noticed a pattern emerging. I was looking at these lessons from Job's integrity, and I thought, there's something very familiar about this. Why does this sound so familiar? And concepts are coming up like faith and knowledge and self-control, and I thought, this is something that I've seen in the New Testament. And then I realized what I was reading was a list of the Christian graces, as we put it. It's 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 5 through 7. That's what I was seeing in the book of Job. This is where Peter says that we ought to supplement our faith with virtue, and virtue with knowledge, and knowledge with self-control, and self-control with steadfastness, and steadfastness with godliness, and godliness with brotherly affection, and brotherly affection with love. And then in verse 8, he says, if these qualities are yours and increasing, they keep you from being ineffective or unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. Now, that was very interesting because those graces, as I'm going to demonstrate in just a moment, were popping up all over the book of Job in connection with his integrity. And they were basically the pattern of integrity that we see throughout Job. Now, a couple of comments on 2 Peter 1. Peter says, supplement your faith with virtue. And he uses a very interesting word there, translated from a Greek word, epikorageo. It's a verb that means not just to conduct a chorus of singers, but to found it, to start it, to fund it, to recruit members of it, to get the music together for it, and then to conduct it so that they sing in complete and beautiful harmony. And so Peter's not telling us to take one at a time of these graces and develop them, but to develop them in perfect harmony with one another throughout your life. There shouldn't be a time where you are missing one of those 8 things, that they're always in complete harmony, which is a hard thing to do. But he says if you develop them, he obviously doesn't mean for us to think that we can be perfect in them all the time, because he says if they are yours and are increasing in verse 8, he goes on to say in verse 10, you will never fall. And he goes on to say in verse 11, I think, that an entrance to heaven will be abundantly open to you. And so what Peter is giving us here is a formula for success in the face of challenges that will keep us from falling away. And when we look at Job and how he expressed integrity in the book of Job, we're seeing the exact same thing. And so I'm just going to take the order that these graces appear in 2 Peter and demonstrate how they pop up in Job, teaching us how integrity can confront all of life's problems and make us stronger. And so how we should integrate our lives to ready ourselves in the face of all these challenges. And here's the first lesson, starting with faith, which is the first item on Peter's list. We see, number one, faith transcends your parts to create integrity. Now, it might be helpful to keep a ribbon or a finger in 2 Peter chapter 1, because I'm going to be going back to that list. And here's the first really interesting insight that I got when I was comparing Job with 2 Peter chapter 1. The first insight that I got is, in the list in 2 Peter chapter 1, you have faith, and then you have virtue. And virtue is like that word integrity. What does it mean? The best alternate translation I found was moral excellence. Okay, so what does that mean? And as I looked into it, I found that that word virtue or moral excellence has to do with any kind of excellence in a person. So it's a very general term, and it has to do with, being a generally a very moral person who does things with excellence and walks with God in what he does. Thayer's dictionary says it describes a virtuous course of thought, feeling, and action. Now, in that, we see the parts of our lives, thoughts, feelings, and actions. Those are compartments of our lives. And some people, their actions don't follow their thoughts, their feelings don't follow their thoughts, their actions don't follow their feelings. When you integrate all of those things together, you have integrity. So, in a way, virtue is integrity. Now, there's some differences there, because I think the word virtue in Peter is a lot broader than integrity, but it certainly is similar to it and includes it. And so in this order that you have in Peter, he says faith creates integrity or virtue. And that goes along with Job, where we see faith transcending your parts to create integrity. For all of these parts in our lives, all of these compartments, the thoughts and the actions, the body and the soul, the left brain, the right brain, for all of these things to come together, something has to rise above them to say this is the order they should come in. And this should be submissive to that, and so on. So what orchestrates all the parts of our lives? What orchestrates them is faith. Faith is what does that. And the opposite of faith is a disordered life. Look at James chapter 1, where James says, if anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, and God will grant it to him. He says, let him ask in faith with no doubting, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. Let not that man think that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. Now, what's really interesting about that is James is contrasting faith with a double-minded man, which is what? A compartmentalized person, a person without integrity. He hasn't integrated his life. He's double-minded. He's thinking this one time and that another time. He can't make up his mind. He's unstable in all his ways. And faith doesn't allow that kind of thinking. When you have faith, faith is going to order your life. It's going to get it all straightened out. And so faith is first. It transcends all of your parts and brings them into harmony. It makes integrity possible. And faith comes from God's Word. Romans chapter 10, verse 17 says, faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the Word of Christ. What has this got to do with Job? Well, Job, he had faith. And it was because of Job's insistence of continuing to believe God's Word that he was able to have integrity through all that he went through. Look at Job chapter 6, verse 10. This is where he says, this would be my comfort. I would even exult in pain unsparing, for I have not denied the words of the Holy One. Because he refused to deny the words of the Holy One, Job could have integrity. He could order all of the conflicting thoughts in the compartments of his life, and he could put them all together and integrate them to strengthen him to face his challenges. So faith transcends your parts to create integrity. Number 2, let's go to knowledge, the third item on Peter's list: faith, virtue, knowledge. What does knowledge do? With regard to integrity, knowledge gives us reasons to seek integrity. Now, on the surface, Job was confronted by a number of challenges to maintaining his integrity. One thing was that he was looking for God and he couldn't seem to find God no matter where he looked. There's a very touching passage in Job 23, verses 8 and 9, where he says, I go forward, but he is not there, and backward, but I do not perceive him. On the left hand, when he's working, I do not behold him. He turns to the right hand, but I do not see him. No matter where I look, I can't find him. Where is God? Seems to be challenged to give up his faith. Another thing that bothered Job, and he reflected on it many times in the book of Job, is that the wicked seemed to be prospering while righteous men like him were suffering greatly. How can that be just? Job asked that question several times. What's the point? Why should I hold on to integrity when there doesn't seem to be any reason to do that? But Job soon found there were plenty of reasons to hold on to his integrity. Chapter 31 gives several of them. We're going to run through these, and we have to do them fairly quickly, but we're going to see this reasoning that knowledge gave him, which allowed him to think, well, it's logical to have integrity in the face of all of this. And chapter 31 is great for that because Job is insisting on his integrity, but he's also imagining, what if I had lived life differently? What if I'd given up my integrity? What if I had decided that righteousness was unimportant, walking after the ways of God was unimportant, and I ignored my faith and just allowed myself to disintegrate and let feelings take over or something else? And every time he did, he realized that would have been the wrong choice, and that's where the reason appears. For example, look at verses 11 and 12. He wonders, well, what if I had allowed my heart to be enticed to adultery? He concludes in verses 11 and 12, that would be a heinous crime. It would be an iniquity to be punished by the judges, for that would be a fire that consumes as far as Abaddon or destruction. So he decides it's morally wrong to give up my integrity. That's what he sees there. Then go down to verse 15. He considers, what if I had been unjust to my servants? What if I had treated them wrong? He says in verse 15, did not he who made me in the womb make him? And did not one fashion us in the womb? He decided that would be wrong, like we talked about this morning. God doesn't show partiality. He created my servants. The same person who created my servants created me. We are equal. And so it would have been wrong for me to treat them unjustly. There was another reason. If you go down to verse 23, he considers something else. What if I give up my integrity? He said, then I would be in terror of calamity from God, and I could not have faced His majesty. He realizes on Judgment Day he would have been condemned. And so he's running through these scenarios. What if I'd given up my integrity? Well, then I would have been wrong. I would have committed iniquity. Or I would have done something unjust because the same Creator who made me made my servants. Or I would not be able to stand before God's wrath on Judgment Day. And then there are two other reasons that he considers in chapter 23, verse 10. It's one of the greatest verses of the Bible, but especially the book of Job, where he considers, God knows the way that I take. And then he says this, when He has tried me, I shall come out as gold. He recognizes two other reasons to hold fast to his integrity there in that very short statement, when He has tried me, I shall come out as gold. The first reason is, I will get through this. Knowledge told him, I will emerge from this somehow. And the second thing knowledge gave him was the idea that when I come out, I will be better than I was before. And so all of these reasons are coming together, and the knowledge is fueling his integrity. It's giving him reasons to continue to seek integrity. And that's why we need to understand, despite all appearances, the people who live with integrity are the people who have their heads screwed on straight. And the people who give up their integrity and give in to disintegration, or however you want to look at it, those are the people who live foolishly. It just doesn't make sense to live without integrity. Integrity is living for the long term. It makes sense for long-term success in this life. It makes sense for long-term success in your relationships. And it makes sense for long-term success in eternity. And knowledge proves all of that. And so that's where knowledge comes in. It gives us reasons to seek integrity. Let's go on to the next one. The next item is self-control. And in Job, you see that self-control is necessary to maintain integrity. Now, Job's self-control was manifested, number one, in the way that he was able to control his tongue. Job showed unparalleled mastery over his mouth, which is a very hard thing to control. James said in James chapter 3, verse 2, that if you're able to control your tongue, you can bridle the whole body. And so this is the best expression of self-control that you can find anyway. And in Job, there are many, many examples of how he was able to hold his tongue or control his speech, especially at the beginning. On day one, he loses his family, his possessions, his livestock. He loses everything pretty much except for his health on day one. And in verse 22 of Job 1, it says that he did not sin or charge God with wrong. But then Satan comes up with another way to torture Job. Let's inflict him with bad health, with wounds, with these boils all over his body. And so in chapter 2, his wife comes to him and she says, why don't you just curse God and die? She tempts him to lose control over his tongue. Do you think that was hard for Job? But the Bible says that Job said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women would speak. He's going back on his knowledge. It's foolish to give up your integrity. And I'm not going to give up my self-control. Shall we receive good from God? And shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. And then in Job chapter 6, verse 30, he asked, is there any injustice on my tongue? Cannot my palate, still talking about his mouth, discern the cause of calamity? He's still working hard to control his tongue. And some may argue, well, Job lost control of his speech many, many times because he's constantly charging God with injustice and he's complaining throughout the book of Job. And that's true, but that's not a sign of a loss of integrity. And he may have spoken wrongly in what he said, but he didn't give up he was being honest, was he not, with what was on the inside. His speech was representing in truth what was in his inward being, and that's what integrity is. He truly felt that he had been treated unjustly, and through ignorance, he thought that maybe God had wronged him, and he was asking God to come and give him a trial, to put the case out there, to see whether he could stand or not. And when he realized that he was wrong, Job said in Job 41, 4 and 5, that he would lay his hand over his mouth. So realizing he was wrong, he's now closing his mouth, which is something that his friends should have done from day one, because in chapter 42 at the end of the book, God says, they did not speak right about me, and they sinned in what they said about me. We need to learn self-control. That's where the maintenance of integrity lies, and especially with our tongues. Death and life, Solomon says, are in the power of the tongue. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21. And we need to realize that every time we speak, every word that comes out of our mouth is a very powerful force in the world. Very powerful. And it can be powerful for good. You can speak words that build others up and in turn build yourself up. You can bless people with your words, lead them to Christ, instruct them, confront their sin in a gentle way. You can do all of these great things with your tongue, or you can tear people down. And what happens when you let those power words come out of your mouth is you unleash an army. It's not just going to do war against the people around you, but they're going to do war against you. And it's like an army you can't bring back in. You create it, but you can't rein it back in. Once it's out there, it's out there. And they attack not only your integrity, but your physical being, your spiritual being, your emotions. Every part of you can be damaged by a lack of self-control, which is why it's so important to integrity. So to maintain it, your faith may create it, your knowledge may give you reasons to continue in it, but without self-control, you can't continue holding it together. Let's go to the next one, steadfastness. Now, sometimes steadfastness is used as a synonym for integrity. It's very close to it, but how is it related to it? Steadfastness chooses integrity despite the circumstances. And that's perhaps why Job is such a great study on integrity, because he had the most awful circumstances a person could have. And his friends were telling him, the circumstances deem that you are in sin. They're preaching this principle that you could call, for lack of a better term, the law of retribution, which says, if you're doing well in life, that's a sign that you're righteous. If you're doing poorly in life, that's a sign that you are wicked. Here's how Bildad frames it in Job chapter 8, verse 3 and following. Does God pervert justice, or does the Almighty pervert the right? If your children have sinned against Him, He has delivered them into the hand of their transgression. Can you imagine a friend telling you that after you lost 10 children? Hey, they got what they deserve. Well, how do you know they got what they deserve? Because they got something. They died, right? Well, that's because you're a bad person, and they were bad people. That's what Bildad is saying. Verse 5, if you will seek God and plead with the Almighty for mercy, if you are pure and upright, surely then He will rouse Himself for you and restore your rightful habitation. Oh, it's that simple. It's that simple. That's how Bildad explained things. But Job's example proved his friends wrong. And Job's example shows that integrity will not protect you from suffering. Let's look at some examples of Job's suffering. We were in Job chapter 8. You can start in Job chapter 7. In verse 3, we get a hint of the duration of the torture he went through physically when he speaks in terms of months instead of days or weeks. This had gone on for months and months. And he says in verse 5, my flesh is clothed with worms and dirt. My skin hardens, then breaks out afresh. He goes on to talk about, in verses 13 and 14, how he thinks that his bed will be a comfort. You know, a lot of times people who are dealing with depression or loss or grief, the only consolation they have is the idea of going to sleep. But Job didn't even have that. Because when he went to his bed, he said, he thinks my couch will ease my complaint. And he says, then you, speaking to God, scare me with dreams and terrify me with visions. So he'd go to bed and he would have nightmares. In chapter 19, he talks about his social isolation. Look at verses 13 and following. He has put my brothers far from me, and those who knew me are wholly estranged from me. My relatives have failed me. My close friends have forgotten me. The guests in my house and my maidservants count me as a stranger. I become a foreigner in their eyes. I call to my servant, but he gives me no answer. I must plead with him with my mouth for mercy. My breath is strange to my wife, and I am a stench to the children of my own mother. Even young children despise me. When I rise, they talk against me. He basically was a monster to little children, a stench to his wife, and a fool to his friends and his servants. This was his physical condition. His suffering was so great, few, if any of us, can even imagine what it was like to be Job. But it wasn't proof that he'd given up his integrity. Steadfastness chose the integrity despite the circumstances. And Job insists on it. We see him insisting on it in chapter 27, which begins, verse 2 says this, "As God lives who has taken away my right, and the Almighty who has made my soul bitter, as long as my breath is in me, and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not speak falsehood, and my tongue will not utter deceit. Far be it from me to say that you are right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. I hold fast my righteousness and will not let it go. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days. Till I die, I will not put my integrity away from me." We have a choice to make. Job shows us this. Steadfastness can choose integrity despite the circumstances, or we can give up and let the circumstances dictate who we will be. Split us into pieces. Tear us apart. And that's what many people decide to do. But the patience of Job held it all together and told him, you have a choice. The circumstances do not have to dictate who you are. Now, very quickly, let's get to the final two items on Peter's list, godliness and love. Godliness looks to the model for integrity. It was Elihu, this latecomer in the book, who said in Job chapter 37, verse 23, "The Almighty, He is great in power, justice, and abundant righteousness He will not violate." What is Elihu saying? God is a person of integrity. It's the nature of God that He is infinite in all of His divine attributes. He lacks nothing in any part of Him. In fact, He is so complete that you can't speak of God as having parts the way you can speak of ourselves as having parts. God is not compartmentalized in any way. He is one. Even when you speak of the Trinity, there are three persons of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They're so unified that Jesus in His prayer to the Lord said, "I am in you and you are in me." They are one. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God." Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 and 5. And Elihu recognizes that there is no limit to His righteousness, no limit to His power, no limit to His omniscience. God is everything. He's a perfect example of integrity, and when we follow integrity, that's godliness. Godliness looks to the model for integrity. Jesus had a phrase for this. He would say in many places that if you behaved in such a way, you shall be called sons of God. But blessed are the peacemakers, Matthew 5, for they shall be called sons of God. Or in Luke 6:35, He talks about giving and lending, expecting nothing in return, being kind to the ungrateful and the evil, because then you'll be called sons of the Most High. What He's saying there is, in the case of Christians, the apple shouldn't fall far from the tree. We should act exactly like our Father. That's what godliness is, following the model of integrity. And then finally we turn to love. What does love have to do with all of this? The last two items on Peter's list are brotherly affection and love. And those two graces bind everything together in perfect harmony. To help us out with this, we go to Colossians chapter 3, verse 14, which says, "Above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony." Love is a coagulant of the soul. It pulls all of the pieces of our lives together in one harmonious whole. Job loved his children. He loved his wife. He loved his friends. He loved his servants. He loved the people of his community and the people in the world. But most of all, Job loved God. And it was that love that was led by faith to pull all of his entire being together into this one faithful person with integrity. That's why when Jesus was asked, "What's the greatest commandment?" He said, number one, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And the second is like unto it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. He goes on to say, on these two commandments, love God, love your neighbor, depend all the law and the prophets. You can obey every letter of the law, but if you do it without love, it's a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. 1 Corinthians 13, 1 through 3. Love pulls it all together. It is absolutely essential that we walk in love because there is no integrity without love. I was just fascinated when I looked at Job and saw all of the Christian graces, as we call them, right there in his example. But I shouldn't have been all that surprised because the same God whom Job served is the God Peter served, the God that we serve. When somebody's going through a tough time, sometimes we might try to encourage him or her, saying, keep it together. Keep it together, man. You can do it. Hold it together. What are we saying there? Don't fall apart. Don't disintegrate. Keep everything together. How do you hold it together? Well, you supplement your faith with virtue, and your virtue with knowledge, and your knowledge with self-control, and all the other things that we've seen from Job and from 2 Peter. They're the ingredients for integrity, of holding it together, of being an integrated person. And when you're solid like that, when you're whole, you can face just about anything. And Job is proof of that. And so I don't know if you're struggling. I know that many of you are. And if you're not now, you will. And I know that many of you have. Don't give up on your integrity. Don't allow the circumstances to dictate who you're going to be. Steadfastness chooses integrity despite all the circumstances. Even now, you may be struggling to hold it all together. Let me encourage you to maintain your integrity. Job has taught us that there's strength in that. And what it did for Job in the end is integrity enabled him to outlive his problems. That's the goal, not to just stay in the challenge. What a hopeless prospect to think this trial will last forever. Who could make it through challenges like that? But if you have this thought that if I hold on and I keep it together, I can outlive this. If not in this life, in the one to come. You can make it through this, but not without integrity. And if we can help you in any way, let us pray with you. Let us encourage you right now as we stand together and sing.